There's a lot of talk on the internet about high-speed sync and hypersync in flash photography, two terms that are quite often completely wrongly used because they are two different technologies, but they both aim at the same purpose, trying to fix the problem of shooting at high shutter speeds with flash units. So I'm going to try to explain the difference a bit. Now, before we do that, let's step back and look at standard flash photography. We all got a digital camera, and the camera has a sensor inside. And it's important that the sensor is exposed for a certain duration of light to have the right capture. Now, to block the sensor from light, we have a shutter. And it's the shutter that will regulate how long the sensor is exposed. Right? So you can dial in on your camera, you can dial in the different shutter speeds, 125th of a second, and so on. The shutter itself is a mechanism consisting of two curtains. A first curtain, which will actually lower down and expose the sensor, and a second curtain, or flag, that will be lowered down shortly after that, and it will start blocking off, basically, the sensor again. So a very simple principle. Depending on what shutter speed you're working, these curtains will move slower or faster. Now, it is important with flash photography that the flash is falling at the moment when the sensor is fully exposed. If the flash goes off too late, then you will have the black bar syndrome at the top of your picture. As you can imagine, the first curtain goes down and it's at the bottom. The second curtain starts to close and now the flash goes off, and now of course only part of the sensor will be exposed. That's why it's so important to know what your flash sync time is on your camera. That is the time between the moment that the first curtain is at the bottom of your sensor and just before the second curtain starts to close. That time window, this is what we call the flash sync time. And that's typically 125th of a second, or 8 milliseconds, or 1/250th of a second, or 4 milliseconds, or 2 milliseconds, whatever you dialed in. Now, how much it is depends on the type of your camera, on the build, the brand, and the make of your camera. So you can find it in your manual. If you try to shoot higher than that, you will have the black bar problem for sure. Now, that was very soon recognized by the producers of cameras, by the producers of flash units, and they said, like, well, we got to do something about this. And they developed two methods. But before we get into that, I also want to mention very shortly that DSLRs always have that problem. Even the high-end DSLRs are having an issue with flash sync times being too low. More state-of-the-art and high-end cameras like mid-formats like Phase 1, they don't have that issue because you can fit leaf shutter lenses, and therefore you can go up to 1/8000th of a second without having any problem with your flashes and the flash synchronization. But we're not going to talk about that. We're talking now about the DSLRs and how great these two technologies are to still be shooting at high shutter speeds. So the first one, high speed. Now, what is high speed? It's very simple. High speed method is a method whereby the flash pulse is extended over time. It turns on and it stays on. It's like turning on the light bulb and leaving it on for a while and then turning it back off. So at higher shutter speeds, the camera behaves a bit different. The first curtain opens up, and very immediately after that, the second curtain comes along, and it's like a moving slit across the sensor. And during this whole move of that slit, the sensor has to be exposed by the light. So the flash pulse is ignited just before the first curtain starts to open up, and it continues to be lit until the second curtain have reached the bottom of the sensor. And it doesn't matter how wide the slit is, because that dimension will change with the shutter speed. The higher the shutter speed, the smaller the slit will be. So this is how that works. Very easy. Of course, you will need a flashlight that supports it, and you will need a trigger that supports it as well. There's all kind of triggers on the market. Cactus and even Broncolor has one now that can deal with this. Pocket Wizard is another one. There's plenty of them that deal with that. The other method is the hypersync. Now hypersync is slightly different. Hypersync works with multiple small flashes. Instead of a prolonged one like high speed, it makes small little pulses. And these small flash pulses are kind of synchronized with the way the curtain is moving over the sensor. When the slit moves down, they start flashing and flashing and flashing and flashing and flashing. That's how that works. Now, obviously, nothing comes for free and everything has disadvantages. High-speed sync is a good method. But if you have a flash unit of 800 watts, you can imagine that you can't use the full power in a high-speed mode because the light bulb has to be lit for the whole duration of that exposure, so you will lose a bit of power. But otherwise, it's quite good. Hypersync, on the other hand, it's a bit less performant, I would say. Again, you have the power problem, and it consumes more power from the flash unit because it turns on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off the flashes. So all these little flashes, your maximum power has to be divided amongst now all these little flashes. So yeah, you tend to lose some of the good advantages of powerful flash units. And certainly if you have a low power flash unit, it's not going to be worth much, if you start shooting hypersync. Nevertheless, there's another problem with hypersync is that the light temperature is not very stable because you're turning on and off the flash bulbs, and it means that it has to come on, it goes off, so the filament inside the tube heats up, cools down, heats up, cools down, and we know when that happens that you get kind of a difference in light temperature. Now you won't see much of that in reality, pending the use or where you use hypersync. Now there is one more aspect on hypersync is that evenly lit pictures can be a problem just because the slit of the shutter system is moving down and illuminating the sensor or exposing the sensor, and then these flash pulses are happening. You can imagine that not all the areas will be exactly exposed the same way, but in most cases you won't see it anyhow, and you can use it. Both are good systems. It all depends what you like to use or what your systems can do. Now, where would you like to use that kind of a method? Because that's always the same question. Why do I want to have high shutter speeds? Well, you can imagine that you're outdoor and you want to catch fast movement. Now, to catch fast movement, that's easy. You focus and then you put a high shutter speed up to freeze the moment, right? But sometimes you want to flash in to, draw the attention to the subject, the object that you want to portray. And if you want to use a fill-in flash, you have a problem if you don't have high speed or hypersync because it just won't work. You're going to miss the flash pulse. So that's one purpose. The other purpose is, of course, if you're outside and it's a bright day and you want to make a portrait of someone, and you want to use a fill-in flash again because that is quite nice. And yet you want to have a very shallow depth of field. So you wide open your lens, you turn it to 2.8 or 1.4, whatever. So the background becomes really blurred. You got this great bouquet, and you only want to have the people in the front sharp, and you want to flash in. Well, if it's a bright day, you will have a problem. Because your lens is now wide open, you will have to compensate with your ISO, but that probably will be already at its lowest level, so then you have to increase the shutter speed, right? So there is another use of the high speed or the hypersync mode. Now, if you work in the studio Never use hyperspeed or high speed. Doesn't make sense. Those two modes only make sense if you have no control on the ambient light. In a studio, you have full control of the ambient light and you have full control of the flash units. So there you should use the flash units in the standard way with the standard flashing times of your camera. It works great and you freeze motion in the studio by the duration of the flash. There is no purpose, no use for hypersync and high speed. Thank you for watching.